She boarded the wrong boat. He never corrected her. And for 7 days, they built something real, until the moment that burned it to the ground. Lily Carter had no idea that the man who handed her coffee every morning, the one with the calloused hands and the unhurried smile, owned every inch of the island beneath her feet. Not the ferry, not the boathouse. All of it. And when the truth finally walked through that dining room door dressed in a tailored jacket, Lily didn't cry. She went completely still. Because the worst kind of betrayal isn't the loud kind. It's the quiet kind, built smile by smile, morning by morning, until you don't even see it coming. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, stay until the end, and let's begin. The ferry was supposed to leave at 7:45. Lily Carter knew this because she had written it on the back of her hand in blue ink the night before, right below the address of the estate and above the name of the woman she was supposed to meet. Margaret Hale, Estate Events Director. She had also set 3 alarms, laid out her clothes the night before, and rehearsed her answers to interview questions while eating instant noodles at her kitchen table in a rented room so small she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms out. She did everything right, and she still missed it. The alarm on her phone had gone off at 6:15, same as always, but somewhere between hitting snooze and closing her eyes for just 5 more minutes, the morning had slipped away from her with the quiet cruelty that only mornings can manage. By the time she jolted awake, it was 7:38. She threw herself out of bed, knocked over a half-empty mug of yesterday's tea, pulled on her blazer inside out, fixed it, grabbed her bag, and ran. The pier was a 12-minute walk from her room. She made it in 7. The public ferry, the wide, flat one with the orange stripe down the side and the hand-painted schedule bolted to the dock post, was already pulling away from the slip when she arrived, breathing hard, one shoe barely tied. She stood at the edge of the dock and watched it go, and for a moment she just stood there with the salt wind in her face and the very real possibility that she was about to blow the only serious job lead she'd had in 4 months. "No," she said out loud to nobody. "No, no, no." She turned. Further down the dock, tucked behind a row of mooring posts and a weathered wooden sign that she didn't stop to read, there was another boat, smaller, cleaner. A wooden-hulled vessel, maybe 30 feet, with a canvas canopy and a single figure moving around near the stern, coiling rope with the unhurried focus of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Lily was already moving before she made a conscious decision to move. "Excuse me," she called out, her heels clicking on the dock planks. "Excuse me, are you heading to Blackwood Island?" The man looked up. He was somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed, though there was something in his face that made him hard to age with any certainty, a kind of steadiness that some people take decades to develop, and others never manage at all. He had dark hair that needed cutting, 2 days of stubble that had not been planned, and he was wearing a faded gray Henley with a small grease stain near the collar that he didn't seem to know about or care about. His hands were wrapped around a coil of rope. He looked, in that moment, exactly like what Lily assumed he was, a dock worker, a boat hand, someone who belonged to the water in the practical, unglamorous way that fishermen and ferry operators do. "I am," he said. His voice was even, not unfriendly. "Can I ride with you?" Lily was already at the edge of the dock, one hand on the boat's railing. "I know this is probably not... I'm assuming this is some kind of staff boat or something, but I have a job interview at 9 and I just missed the public ferry, and if I don't get there, I'm going to lose the only real shot I've had at steady work in..." She stopped herself. I'm sorry. That was a lot. "Can I please ride with you?" The man looked at her for a moment, not sizing her up in the way some men did, not calculating anything, just looking, the way you might look at weather rolling in off the water, trying to determine what it was going to do. "Get in," he said. She got in. Fine. She sat on the bench at the front of the boat while he moved through the starting sequence with practiced efficiency, untying, pushing off, settling into the captain's seat with the kind of ease that told her he'd done this hundreds of times. The engine turned over with a low rumble, and they moved out of the slip and into the open water, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Lily watched the mainland shore recede and tried to slow her breathing. "Thank you," she said finally. Seriously, I know I basically threw myself onto your boat. You did, he agreed, without any particular judgment in it. I'm Lily. Ethan. Do you do this run every day, Ethan? He kept his eyes on the water. Most days. Is it always this early? Usually earlier. She nodded, then looked out at the horizon. The water was dark green this time of morning, and the sky had that particular pale quality of early light that made everything look slightly unfinished, like a painting that hadn't been touched up yet. A pelican banked low over the water 50 yards to their left, and then was gone. It's beautiful out here, she said, and she meant it without any performative quality. It was just true. Yeah, Ethan said, it is. Somewhere around the 20-minute mark, with the island now visible as a dark shape on the horizon, and the mainland fully gone from view behind them, Lily started talking. She wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe it was the open water, which has a way of making ordinary social guardrails feel slightly irrelevant. Maybe it was the fact that she had been holding everything tightly inside herself for so long that the pressure had reached a threshold. Maybe it was simply that Ethan was the first person in weeks who had given her his full and quiet attention without wanting something in return. I've been applying for jobs for 4 months, she said. 19 applications, 3 callbacks, 1 actual interview, which was for a position that turned out to be unpaid, which, I don't know why they didn't mention that in the listing. She shook her head. This is the 2nd actual interview. The estate is looking for an event coordinator, which I'm actually qualified for. I did this for 2 years at a boutique hotel in the city before they downsized. I'm good at it. I know I'm good at it. Then you should say that, Ethan said. What? In the interview, say exactly that. I know I'm good at it. People who actually are good at things sometimes forget to say so. Lily looked at him. That's surprisingly useful advice from a ferry operator. Something moved across his face, the ghost of something, a reaction she couldn't quite read, and then it was gone. I've sat in a lot of interviews, he said. On which side? He paused just a half beat too long. Both. Lily filed that away as mildly interesting and continued. She told him about her apartment, the small one, the one with the walls close enough to touch, though she didn't phrase it quite that way. She told him about the instant noodles and the 3 alarms and the ink on her hand. She told him about her last job, and the manager who had promised the downsizing wouldn't affect her team right up until the Friday afternoon he sent the email, and how she had cried in her car for 20 minutes and then gone home and updated her resume because she was 29 years old and she didn't have the luxury of falling apart for long. 30, she corrected herself. I keep forgetting I turned 30 in March. Happy belated birthday, Ethan said. Don't. 30 with no job and instant noodles is not a birthday anyone should be congratulated for. You're on a boat at 7 in the morning chasing a job interview, he said. That's not nothing. She looked at him again. He was watching the water, both hands resting loosely on the wheel, and there was something in his profile, in the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his eyes, that made her think of a man carrying something heavy that he had long since stopped noticing the weight of. You have kids? She asked. She wasn't sure what made her ask it. He turned his head slightly. A daughter. She's 4. Is she on the island? With a sitter this morning. She doesn't like mornings. A pause. Neither do I, if I'm honest. What's her name? Sophie. The way he said it was different from the way he said everything else. It was the only word in the conversation that came out soft. That's a good name, Lily said. He nodded and looked back at the water and didn't say anything, and Lily understood that she had touched something real and had the decency not to press on it. She didn't realize she had started talking about the island's owner until she was already in the middle of it. I looked him up before I applied, she said. Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire, owns the whole island, apparently. Has some kind of tech acquisition company or something. I didn't understand most of it. She pulled at a loose thread on her blazer cuff. The photos online make him look like the kind of person who's never had to worry about anything in his entire life, you know? Like the world was just arranged for him. The man at the wheel said nothing. I don't mean that to sound bitter, Lily said. I've always wondered what it's like to move through the world like that.
without the financial anxiety constantly running in the background like bad elevator music. She paused. Sorry, you probably don't want to hear about this. I don't mind, Ethan said. You're very easy to talk to. People tell me that. I bet they do. She looked out at the island, which was close enough now that she could see the tree line and the pale shape of buildings set back from the shore. Is he a good boss, Blackwood? A moment of silence, then, he has his moments. That's a very diplomatic answer. He's a private person, hard to know sometimes. Do you like working for him? Ethan was quiet for long enough that she thought he hadn't heard her. Then he said, I like the island. It was not exactly an answer, but Lily let it go. Annette.
She made it to the estate at 8:49. The estate manager who met her at the gate was a woman named Clara, somewhere in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the composed efficiency of someone who had been managing organized chaos for decades. She looked at Lily's slightly wind-blown hair and the small water stain on the hem of her blazer where she'd stepped getting off the boat, and her expression shifted in a way that could have been judgment, but turned out, Lily would later realize, to be something closer to amused approval. You came with the morning boat? Clara said. It was not quite a question. I missed the public ferry, Lily admitted. How did you... Clara stopped. Never mind. Come in. The interview lasted 40 minutes and went better than Lily had any right to expect, given that she had arrived damp and slightly out of breath. She had walked through the estate's main hall, and her brain had immediately started cataloging. The proportions of the reception space, the natural light from the south-facing windows, the courtyard visible through the glass doors that would be stunning for an outdoor reception if someone put lanterns along the stone paths. She'd mentioned this to Clara, not because she was trying to perform competence, but because she genuinely couldn't help it, the way some people immediately start noticing the acoustics of a room when they walk in. Clara had made a note. The questions were straightforward: experience, examples, problem-solving under pressure. Lily answered them the way Ethan had suggested without fully realizing she was doing it, directly, without the hedging qualifiers she usually wrapped around her achievements like protective padding. At the end, Clara had said, I can offer you a 1-week probationary period. If things go well, we'll talk about a permanent contract. Lily had shaken her hand and said, Thank you. You won't regret it. She hadn't cried until she was back outside in the courtyard, sitting on a stone bench beside a dried-up fountain where no one could see her. And even then, it lasted about 30 seconds before she wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a deep breath and told herself to pull it together because she had work to start thinking about. The boathouse was at the southern end of the property, down a gravel path that wound through a stand of sea oats and cypress trees. Lily found it on her second day, not because she was looking for it, but because she had taken a wrong turn during a grounds walk and followed the path out of curiosity rather than retracing her steps. The door was open. Inside, it smelled like motor oil and salt water and old wood, and the morning light came in sideways through a row of high windows and made the dust motes in the air look like they were moving in slow motion. 2 boats sat in their slips. A third was pulled up on a wooden cradle with its hull half sanded. And at a small workbench near the back, with a portable camping stove, a tin pour-over stand, and a paper filter, Ethan was making coffee with the careful attention of a man performing a small ritual. You work here too? Lily said from the doorway. He looked up. He didn't seem surprised to see her. In the mornings, before the boats go out. So you operate the ferry and maintain the fleet. Something like that. She stepped inside, looking around. The space was organized in the particular way of someone who had spent a lot of time alone in it. Tools in their places, everything within reach, nothing wasted. What are you making? Coffee. Do you drink it? I live on it. Then this will disappoint you, he said, because I make it wrong. She came closer and looked at what he was doing. He had the filter loaded, the water in a beat-up kettle that was starting to hiss gently on the burner, and the grind was coarse enough that she could see it from 3 feet away. Yeah, she said, you do make it wrong. He looked at her. There was something in his expression that might have been the beginning of a smile if it had decided to commit. I've been told. Who told you? My daughter. She's 4. She mostly judges by smell. Lily laughed despite herself. It was the kind of laugh that came out of her before she had time to arrange her face, unguarded and real. She set her bag down on a wooden stool, rolled up her blazer sleeve, and said, "Move over." "Excuse me?" "You're going to let me show you how to do this properly, or that coffee is going to be criminal and I'll have to report it." He stepped aside. She came back the next morning, and the one after that. It became, without either of them formally agreeing to it, a thing. Lily would arrive at the boathouse around 6:30, half an hour before her official workday began, and Ethan would already be there. She would make the coffee, properly, with the right grind, the correct water temperature, the slow pour that let the grounds bloom before the full extraction, and he would watch the first time, then try himself the second time, then fail in a way that was incrementally less terrible the third time. She was a patient teacher. He was a surprisingly focused student. They would drink their coffee sitting on overturned crates near the open doors, looking out at the water while it changed color in the early light. They talked about small things, mostly. Sophie's recent obsession with a particular brand of dinosaur figurines, the logistics of the upcoming estate dinner that Lily was coordinating, a book Lily had been trying to read for 3 months and kept putting down, the way the water looked different on cloudy mornings, more secretive, less willing to give anything away. Ethan asked questions, thoughtful ones, the kind that made her feel like her answers actually mattered to someone, which was not a feeling she was used to. "Why event coordination?" he asked one morning, about 4 days in. Lily wrapped both hands around her cup. "I like the part where the thing doesn't exist, and then it does," she said. "You start with an empty room and a guest list and a problem to solve, and then, if you do everything right, you end the evening with something that felt like it was supposed to happen, like it was always going to be that way." She paused. "That sounds more profound than I mean it." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at him. He was looking at the water. The morning light was making his face look younger and older at the same time, if that was possible. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me? What do you actually want to do? Like, if you weren't operating boats and maintaining the fleet, if you could do anything." He was quiet for long enough that she thought she'd overstepped. "This," he said finally, "be a boat mechanic? Be here, doing something with my hands in the morning before the island wakes up." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Not having to be—" He stopped. "Not having to be what?" "Useful in the way other people want you to be," he said. And it came out carefully, like he had chosen the words from a set of other options and discarded each of the more honest ones. Lily looked at him. "That's a strange thing for a ferry operator to say. Is it? Most people would want more, not less. Most people don't know what they have when they have it." She thought about that. "Is that something someone told you or something you figured out?" "Both," he said, "in that order." Sophie met her on the 5th day. Ethan hadn't planned it, or if he hadn't mentioned it. Lily arrived at the boathouse at her usual time and found not one person inside, but 2. Ethan at the workbench with his coffee set up, and a small girl sitting on the larger of the 2 overturned crates, holding a blue plastic stegosaurus in each hand and staging what appeared to be a diplomatic negotiation between them. She was 4 years old, and she had her father's dark hair and a pair of yellow rain boots that were several sizes too big for her, which she apparently wore indoors out of personal preference. "This is Sophie," Ethan said. Sophie looked up at Lily with the frank, evaluating look that only small children and very old people can manage without it being rude. "You're the one who's been fixing his coffee," she said. Lily blinked. "He told you about that?" "He said a lady at work was teaching him to make it better." Sophie considered her stegosauruses. "He still makes it wrong." "I know," Lily said gravely. "We're working on it." "I brought extra dinosaurs," Sophie said, and held one out, a small purple triceratops. "You can use this one while you're here." Lily sat down on the other crate and accepted the triceratops with appropriate seriousness. "What's her name?" "His name is Gerald." "Gerald is a good name." "He's afraid of boats," Sophie confided, "but he's working on it." Ethan was watching them from the workbench with his back half turned and his hands busy with something or pretending to be. But Lily caught his expression in the reflection of the window glass above the bench. An unguarded thing, almost painful in its openness, the face of a man watching something he had been afraid he would never have again. She pretended she hadn't seen it, but she thought about it for the rest of the day. By the end of the 6th day, the estate's annual family dinner was 36 hours away, and Lily had put together something she was genuinely proud of. The theme she had proposed was understated rather than showy. Local flowers instead of imported arrangements, candlelight instead of the elaborate lighting rig the previous coordinator had favored, a seating plan that actually reflected who the guests were rather than a hierarchy of who the host was supposed to want to impress. Clara had approved everything with the kind of efficient nod that Lily was beginning to understand meant, "This is better than what we've had." She had asked only once about the owner, whether she would meet him before the dinner, whether he had specific preferences she should know about. "He trusts the estate to run itself," Clara had said, which Lily had interpreted as he's not involved in the details, and filed away without giving it much thought. That evening, she found Ethan at the dock, finishing up a repair to the smaller ferry's engine. She sat on the dock edge with her legs hanging over the water and told him how the dinner plans were shaping up, because she had gotten into the habit of telling him things, and he had gotten into the habit of listening in the particular way he did, with his full attention, without offering solutions she hadn't asked for. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "About the dinner?" "No." She thought about it. "I'm more nervous about what happens after the week is up, if they keep me on or not." "They'll keep you on." "You don't know that." "I've been watching you work all week," he said. "You fix things before anyone knows they need fixing. You anticipate problems instead of reacting to them. You treat the people who maintain this property with the same respect you give the guest." He paused. "They'd be idiots not to keep you." Lily looked at him. He was still bent over the engine, his face half lit by the small work light clipped to the dock rail, and he had said all of that the way he said most things, without drama, without the careful framing of a compliment designed to get something in return. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a professional context in years," she said. "It's just accurate." "Ethan." "What?" "I'm glad I got on the wrong boat." He looked up at her then. The light caught something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the steadiness, not the quiet, but something underneath all of it, something exposed. "So am I," he said. And then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and he looked at it, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite tension, but close. And he said, "I need to get back." "To Sophie?" "Yeah." He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag. "She has opinions about bedtime." Lily laughed. "Tell Gerald I said good night." Ethan looked at her for a moment, the ghost of that smile again, and then he walked back toward the estate, and she watched him go and sat there in the dark for a while longer with the water moving quietly beneath her feet. She did not know, that night, that the man who had just walked away from her in a faded Henley with grease on his collar owned the dock she was sitting on, the boats rocking gently in their slips, the path he was walking, the estate at the end of that path, and most of the island she could see in every direction. She did not know that tomorrow evening, everything she thought she understood about the past 7 days was going to collapse all at once. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she just sat with her feet over the water and the salt smell in the air and the unfamiliar, fragile feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't feel like she was running out of time. The morning after she sat on the dock with her feet over the water, Lily woke up at 5:45 without an alarm. This was unusual. She was not, by nature or preference, a person who woke before sunrise. She had built her entire adult life around the understanding that the morning was something to be survived rather than enjoyed, navigated with coffee and necessity rather than embraced. But she was awake, and the room they had given her in the estate's east wing, small, with a window that faced the water and curtains that didn't quite block the light, was already filling with the pale gray of pre-dawn, and she lay there for about 3 minutes before she gave up and got out of bed. She made it to the boathouse by 6:20. Ethan was already there. Of course he was. She was beginning to suspect he slept somewhere inside the building itself, or possibly didn't sleep at all. That he simply existed in the boathouse the way the boats did, present and functional and slightly salt-worn. He had the camping stove going and the kettle heating, and he was attempting the pour-over setup she had shown him with the focused expression of a man disarming something complicated. He looked up when she came in. "You're early," he said. "You're earlier." "I have a 4-year-old. I'm always earlier than everyone." He looked back down at the filter. She woke up at 4:30 asking where Gerald was. "Did you find him?" "Under the kitchen table. He'd been there the whole time." He adjusted the filter. She cried anyway. Lily set her bag down and came to look at what he was doing. The grind was better than it had been. She'd left him specific instructions on the small chalkboard she'd found hanging on the boathouse wall, with a drawing of the coffee grounds at the correct size for scale, which Sophie had later decorated with a small triceratops in the corner. The water temperature, however, was wrong again. "Too hot," she said, reaching past him to lift the kettle off the burner. "You have to let it sit for 30 seconds after it boils. You're scalding the grounds." "I've been doing this for 32 years. "Doing it wrong for 32 years. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but occupied the same territory. "Most people don't correct me this often. Most people aren't drinking your coffee." She took over the kettle, counting quietly to herself. And he stepped back and leaned against the workbench with his arms crossed and watched her the way he always watched her. Attentively but without pressure, the way you watch weather or water, not trying to change it but genuinely interested in what it's going to do. She had noticed this about him over the past several days. He was one of those rare people who could give you their full attention without making you feel examined. It was a quality she had no name for and had not encountered often enough to take for granted. "Clara told me the dinner guest list got expanded," she said, starting the pour. 12 people became 18 overnight. "Is that a problem?" "It's a puzzle." She tilted the kettle slowly. "The seating arrangement I had doesn't work with 18. I need to rethink the table configuration, which means the lighting setup changes, which means the floral pieces I ordered are now the wrong scale." She paused. "I've been running the math in my head since 4 a.m. And I think I have it, but I won't know until I'm standing in the room with a tape measure." She finished the pour and set the kettle down. "Your job is harder to rethink." "What do you mean?" "Boats. They're fixed sizes. You can't rearrange a boat because the guest list changed." He considered this seriously, which she was learning was a thing he did. Took small observations and gave them actual thought instead of just bouncing them back with a nod. "You can rearrange how you move through the water," he said. "Different routes, different times. The boat stays the same, but everything else is negotiable." Lily looked at him. "Is that a metaphor for something?" "It's a metaphor for sailing." "It sounds like a metaphor for something else." "Then maybe it is." He reached for the cup she'd set out for him. "But sailing first." She poured her own cup and they settled into their usual positions, her on the wooden stool she'd claimed on the second morning, him on the overturned crate, both of them facing the open door and the water beyond it. The sky was doing something complicated out there, layers of gray and silver, and the first hesitant suggestion of pink along the horizon, and the water was flat enough this morning that it reflected the sky almost perfectly, so that you had the disorienting sensation of looking at two skies at once, one right side up and one upside down. They drank their coffee and didn't talk for a while, which was something else Lily had noticed about these mornings, that the silences didn't need to be filled, that they had, somewhere between the second and third day, moved past the point where quiet felt awkward and arrived at the kind of comfortable silence that most friendships take years to develop. She didn't examine this too closely. She just appreciated it the way you appreciate good weather, without demanding to understand why it's happening. "Sophie asked about you this morning," Ethan said eventually. "Before or after the Gerald crisis?" "After. She wanted to know if you were going to come back to the boathouse today." Lily smiled into her cup. "What did you tell her?" "I said I didn't know." "And?" "She said, 'Tell her Gerald likes her.'" He paused. "Which is high praise. Gerald doesn't like many people." "I'm honored." Lily looked down at the small purple triceratops that she had, without fully deciding to, begun carrying in the outside pocket of her bag. Sophie had pressed it into her hands on the third morning with great ceremony and the instruction that Gerald needed someone to look after him during the day while Sophie was busy,
and Lily had accepted this responsibility with the gravity it deserved. Tell her Gerald is doing fine. He's been supervising the event planning. I'll let her know. Lily turned her cup in her hands. The coffee was good today. Genuinely good. Better than the previous attempts, the bitterness balanced out by the bloom and the temperature and the slower pour. She thought about telling him this directly, but decided instead to let him figure it out himself, because the look on someone's face when they realize they've done something right without being told is better than any compliment. She watched him take another sip and saw the moment he registered it. A small pause, a shift in the way he held the cup. Better, he said, to no one in particular. Yeah, she agreed. It is. He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything. And the morning came in through the open door, and the water held its two skies, and somewhere on the island a bird started up with something that was either a song or a complaint. It was hard to say which. She had the tape measure in her hand by 7:30 and spent the first half of her official workday in the main dining room, lying on her stomach on the stone floor at one point to look at the light angles from a different vantage point, which was when Marcus found her. Marcus was one of the estate's groundskeepers, mid-40s, with a slow Louisiana drawl and the permanently sun-darkened skin of a man who had worked outdoors his entire life. He had initially regarded Lily with the polite wariness that long-term employees reserve for new arrivals on probation. Not unkind, exactly, but withholding the full weight of his trust until she'd earned it. By the third day, however, she had won him over in the specific way that Lily tended to win people over, which was not by being charming, but by actually listening when he talked about what the previous event coordinator had gotten wrong. He found her on the floor and did not visibly react, which spoke well of him. Problem? He said. The chandelier is 2 feet off center from where the table needs to be, she said from the floor. If I center the table properly, all the light pools at one end and leaves the other end looking like a storage room. Marcus crouched down to her level and looked at the chandelier, then at the floor, in the same methodical way she'd been doing it. Can't move the chandelier. I know, so I need to supplement the lighting at the far end without making it look like I'm compensating. She sat up. What do you have in the equipment shed? Any directional warm-tone floods? Got some old theatrical spots in there from when they did an outdoor event 2 summers back. Would they work indoors without cooking everyone? Might, if we keep them aimed at the walls instead of the tables. Lily was on her feet before he'd finished the sentence, already mentally repositioning the floral arrangements to work with the adjusted light. Can I see them after lunch? I'll pull them out for you. She was halfway to the door before she turned back. Marcus, when you say they did an outdoor event, was that something the owner organized or was it external? Marcus's expression did something brief and careful. Owner has a birthday for Sophie every summer, he said, invites half the island. It's a good time. He seems involved, Lily said. More than I expected, for someone who apparently runs a major company from here. Marcus looked at the chandelier. He's a good man, he said, in the tone of someone who meant it specifically and wasn't going to elaborate. Best I've worked for. Lily nodded and left it at that. She had learned over the past several days that the people who worked on this island had a particular way of deflecting questions about the owner. Not evasive, exactly, but careful, like they were protecting something they valued. She had put this down to professional loyalty and moved on. She would think about it differently later. The afternoon brought a small crisis that turned out to be less small than it initially presented itself. The florist on the mainland, the one Lily had coordinated with for the table arrangements, called at 2:15 to say that the white ranunculus she'd ordered wasn't coming. A shipping issue, a supplier problem, some cascade of failures that had resolved by the time it reached Lily into a simple and final, it won't be there. Lily sat with the phone in her hand for about 10 seconds. Then she called Clara. I need to know what's growing on the island right now, she said. Not imported, local. What's actually in the garden? Clara paused. The kitchen garden has lavender that's going strong. The east beds have some wild sea roses. They're a little past peak, but they'd work. Marcus planted a row of white salvia along the south wall in April. Can I use them? You'd have to ask Marcus.
She found Marcus in the equipment shed, pulling out the theatrical lights as promised. She explained the situation in about 45 seconds, which was her average time for explaining problems, because she had learned that most people's tolerance for context evaporated quickly when there was a solution available. "The ranunculus is gone," she said. "I want to use what's in the garden: lavender, sea roses, the white salvia. Will they hold overnight in water?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Salvia holds fine. Sea roses are touchy. You'd want to cut them last minute, maybe the morning of. Lavender's basically indestructible." "Then that's what we're using." She paused. "They'll look better anyway, more like the island, less like a hotel." Marcus looked at her for a moment with that evaluating quality he had, the same one Clara had, that the entire staff seemed to share, as though they were all measuring something specific without explaining what it was. Then he nodded. "I'll cut you a trial arrangement this afternoon so you can see what you're working with." "Thank you." She turned to go. "Miss Carter." She looked back. "He's going to like the salvia," Marcus said, not elaborating who he was. His wife planted the first row. The sentence landed quietly, without drama, and Lily recognized it as the kind of information that comes gift-wrapped in trust, the small, real things that people share when they've decided you can be trusted with them. "Thank you for telling me that," she said, and she meant it. Mrasan. She was in the kitchen at 4 o'clock working through the dinner menu with the estate's cook, a woman named Bee, who had the culinary philosophy of someone who had been feeding people through difficult times for 30 years and had arrived at a pragmatic and deeply capable approach to feeding them well. When she heard small feet on the flagstone hallway outside, and then a voice she recognized. "Gerald?" Lily looked up. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway in her yellow rain boots, still wearing them despite the fact that it had not rained today and was unlikely to rain, with a small dinosaur clutched in each hand and a look of focused urgency on her face. "I'm looking for Gerald," she said. "He's in my bag," Lily told her. "By the window, outer pocket." Sophie crossed the kitchen with the purposeful gait of someone on a mission, located the bag, extracted the small purple triceratops with careful hands, and subjected him to what appeared to be a brief but thorough inspection. Bee watched this with no visible reaction, which suggested it was not the first time a small person had conducted dinosaur triage in her kitchen. "He's fine," Sophie reported. "I told you he would be." Sophie set Gerald down on the windowsill facing the courtyard and sat herself on the low step beside the window, apparently having decided that she would remain here now. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Planning what everyone's going to eat at the dinner." "Is my daddy going to eat at the dinner?" Something tightened briefly in Lily's chest without her being entirely sure why. "Is your dad usually at the estate dinners?" "He's always at the dinners." Sophie picked at the rubber toe of her rain boot. "He says it's important to be there when people come to his—" She stopped, then said, carefully, the way children say things when they've been coached to say something differently than they naturally would, "when people come to visit." "That makes sense," Lily said, watching her. "Your dad is good at being present for things." Sophie looked up. She had her father's eyes, that same particular quality of paying close attention without demanding anything from what they were looking at. "He likes you," she said, matter-of-factly. Lily blinked. "We're friends." "He doesn't have a lot of friends," Sophie said with the devastating accuracy of a 4-year-old who has been listening to adult conversations from around corners. "He says most people want something from him." "What do you want from him?" Lily asked, deflecting with a smile. "I want a dog," Sophie said promptly. "He says no because dogs and boats are complicated, but I think Gerald could train it." "Gerald is very capable," Lily agreed. Sophie appeared to accept this and returned to examining her rain boot. Bee, at the counter behind Lily, made a small sound that was carefully not a comment, after Sophie had collected Gerald and departed, with the same focused purposefulness with which she had arrived. Bee said, without looking up from the stock she was reducing, "That little girl is the best thing that's happened to this island in 4 years." "She's something," Lily agreed. "Her mama was, too." Bee stirred the stock. "Different kind of something, quieter, but good." A pause. "He came here after,"
Bought out the ferry company, had the estate refurbished, put down roots. People thought he was running from something. I think he was running towards something. Just took him a while to figure out what.
Lily looked at the counter, at the note she'd made for the dinner menu. She thought about Ethan at the wheel of the boat on the morning she'd met him, watching the water with that steadiness that had nothing to do with ease and everything to do with having decided, at some point, not to be destroyed by what had happened. "Is he happy here?" she asked. Bea considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "He's getting there," she said, "which is better than most people manage." She found him at the boathouse again that evening, later than usual, the sun already going red at the water's edge. He was working on the hull of the boat on the wooden cradle, sanding by hand in slow, even strokes, and he didn't hear her coming over the sound of his own work. She stood in the doorway for a moment watching him before she said anything, not for any particular reason, just because there was something in the image that was worth a moment. The red light, the rhythmic work, the absolute lack of performance in the way he moved through a task when he thought nobody was watching. "Sophie came to see Gerald," she said. He looked up, set down the sandpaper. "She told me she was going to the garden." "She went to the kitchen. Via the garden, maybe." Lily leaned against the doorframe. She inspected him very thoroughly. He passed. Ethan picked up a cloth and wiped his hands. "She takes her responsibilities seriously." "I noticed." Lily came inside. "She told me most people want something from you." He was quiet for a moment. "She's been listening to things she shouldn't have. Or she understands more than you think she does." Both are probably true. He folded the cloth, unfolded it, set it down. "She's not wrong." "I know." Lily sat on her usual stool. The boathouse was warm from the day's stored heat, and it smelled like sawdust now on top of the usual oil and salt, and the low red light came in through the high windows at an angle that made everything look like the last frame of something. "People have been trying to manage what they tell me about you," she said. "About the owner, I mean. Everyone's very careful." "Clara trains them well." "It's not training," Lily said. "It's loyalty. There's a difference." She looked at him. He was very still. "Bea told me his wife planted the first row of salvia. Marcus said it in passing about the birthday parties. Clara doesn't say much at all, but the way she doesn't say it is its own kind of statement." She paused. "He must be a better employer than I initially gave him credit for." "What did you give him credit for, initially?" "Someone who collects things, property, staff, a private island. Someone who uses wealth as a buffer between themselves and having to be a person." "And now?" Lily looked at the boat on the cradle, at the careful hand sanding along the waterline. "Now, I think there's more to the story than the photos online suggested." She pulled Gerald out of her bag pocket and set him on the workbench, which had become his unofficial position on boathouse evenings. "Did you know him? Before you worked here?" Ethan looked at Gerald. His expression was doing something complicated. "I knew of him," he said carefully. "What was he like?" "Harder then. More defended." He turned away, picked up the sandpaper again. "People who've lost a lot sometimes build themselves into something very efficient and very sealed, less room for things to go wrong if everything stays controlled." He ran his thumb along the hull. "Fatherhood has a way of dismantling that. You can't be sealed when you have a 4-year-old who cries at 4 a.m. because her dinosaur is under the kitchen table." Lily looked at him, at the back of his head, at the grease stain on the collar that had been there since the first day. Or maybe it was a different grease stain in a slightly different place. She couldn't be sure. "Ethan," she said. I'm glad you're here." He turned enough that she could see his profile. The red light caught the edge of his jaw, the corner of his eye. "Me too," he said. It was simple the way he said it. No elaboration, no hedging. Just the direct weight of it, placed on the air between them without decoration. She nodded once and picked up her notes for the dinner, and they sat in the warm evening in the good quiet that they had built between them, while the sun finished going down outside and the water turned from red to black, and the boathouse held its familiar smell around them like something deliberately kept. What she did not know, sitting there with her menu notes and her borrowed triceratops and her easy assumption that she understood the shape of the life around her, was that the dinner was now 30 hours away, that a storm was already building 200 miles to the southeast,
invisible and unhurried. That the catering shipment scheduled to arrive the following afternoon was going to be turned back before it reached the harbor. That 18 guests would sit down in that dining room to a crisis that hadn't been planned for. And she did not know that the empty chair reserved for the host of the Blackwood Estate annual family dinner, the chair that Clara had placed at the head of the table with the particular care of someone setting a stage, belonged to the man who was sitting 10 feet away from her, smoothing a hull with sandpaper while the last light left the water outside. She did not know any of this yet, but the storm knew where it was going, and morning was only a few hours away. The storm announced itself the way the worst ones always do, not with drama, but with a kind of atmospheric holding of breath. Lily noticed it first at 6 a.m. when she arrived at the boathouse and found the water outside had gone the color of old pewter, flat and dull, in a way that had nothing to do with the early hour. The horizon had disappeared, not behind fog exactly, but behind something denser, a smudging of the line between sky and sea that made the world feel smaller than it had the day before, like the edges were being drawn in. Ethan was already there, but he wasn't making coffee. He was standing at the boathouse door with his phone in his hand and his eyes on the water, and when she came in, he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. The particular concentration of someone running calculations in real time. "That doesn't look good," she said, nodding at the horizon. "It's not." He tilted the phone screen toward her. A weather radar image, all green and yellow, and an angry smear of orange moving from the southeast. "It'll make landfall on the island by early afternoon, maybe sooner if it picks up speed." Lily looked at the radar, then at the water, then back at the radar. "The catering shipment is supposed to arrive at 2. "It won't." The certainty in his voice was immediate, flat, and she understood from the way he said it that this was not speculation, that he knew these waters well enough to know that what was coming wouldn't negotiate with anyone's schedule. "The dinner's tonight," she said. 18 guests. The salvia she and Marcus had arranged the previous afternoon, standing in their vases in the cold room. The lighting configuration she'd spent 3 days working out. The handwritten menus that Bee's daughter had calligraphed last night as a favor, because Lily had asked nicely and explained the situation and people on this island, she had discovered, tended to help when you asked them like you meant it. "I know," Ethan said. She stood there for a moment in the gray light with the dead weight of the problem settling onto her shoulders. The catering shipment wasn't supplementary. It was the primary food source for the dinner. The estate kitchen had a working stock of basics, but nothing close to what 18 people needed for a formal dinner. The last ferry from the mainland wouldn't make it through what was coming. No boat would. Not safely. "Okay," she said. She said it to herself as much as to him. "Okay?" He looked at her. "Okay. I need to think." She dropped her bag on the stool, pulled out the notepad she kept in the front pocket, the one with the menu written out in her own handwriting, annotated in 3 different pen colors with timing notes and serving sequences. She stared at it. What does the kitchen actually have? Not what was ordered, what's physically on the island right now. Bee would know. "I need to talk to Bee." She was already moving toward the door. "Lily." She stopped. He was still standing with his phone, and the water behind him had gone another shade darker while they'd been talking, the flatness of it beginning to develop a slow, deep swell that was worse in some ways than whitecaps, the kind of motion that came from far away, and meant the storm had been building longer than the radar suggested. "Whatever you're thinking of doing," he said, "you don't have to do it alone." She looked at him. He meant it. It was in his voice, direct and without the qualifying softness people sometimes added to offers they didn't fully intend. She nodded once and went. Bee received the news with the equanimity of a woman who had cooked through power outages, 2 surprise vegetarian guests, and 1 incident involving a wayward seagull and a tray of canapes that she described simply as the 2019 situation and declined to elaborate on. "Tell me what we have," Lily said, standing at the kitchen counter with her notepad open. Bee opened the cold room and began reciting with the efficiency of someone who took stock every morning as a matter of professional religion. 2 sides of local fish, fresh caught, delivered yesterday from the island's small commercial pier. Potatoes, plenty. A dozen eggs. Butter, cream,
the usual dairy. Dried pasta, 3 varieties. The kitchen garden, the lavender, the salvia for the table arrangements, fresh herbs in abundance. Rosemary, thyme, flat-leaf parsley. A case of good olive oil that had been ordered for the original menu and arrived early. 2 dozen lemons. Half a wheel of aged cheese from a local dairy on the mainland already on the island. Cured meats in the larder. Not fancy, not planned for this dinner, but there. Lily wrote as Bee talked. She did not say anything while the list was being assembled. She had learned to gather the complete picture before she started rearranging it. When Bee finished, Lily looked at her notes for about 45 seconds in complete silence. Then she said, herb-crusted fish as the main, pan-roasted, not baked, better control, and the oven's unreliable under pressure. Potato gratin on the side, cream and cheese, something that holds well and feels substantial. Fresh pasta if we have the time, or good bread if we don't. A charcuterie spread to start, the cured meats and cheese and whatever comes out of the garden that works as a pickle or preserve. Finish with something simple. The cream can become a panna cotta, there's gelatin in the stock pantry, and I saw preserved fruit in the larder that will work as a topping. Bee looked at her. That's a real dinner. It needs to be. These are guests, not survivors. She closed the notepad. Can you do the fish and the gratin? In my sleep. Good. What do you need from me? The pasta, if we're doing it, and someone to keep the service moving once we start plating. I'll make the pasta. Lily hadn't made fresh pasta since a cooking class she'd taken 3 years ago and not repeated, which was not the moment to mention. Who else is in the kitchen today? My nephew Denny helps on dinner nights. He's reliable with the prep. Get him in early, by 10 if you can. Lily was already pulling off her blazer and reaching for one of the aprons hanging by the kitchen door. I need to talk to Clara first, then I'll be back. The table arrangements, Bee started, are fine. The salvia's in water. Marcus cut them yesterday evening. They'll hold until I can get them out an hour before service. She tied the apron. Is the storm going to knock the power out? Might. Do we have candles? In the dining room storage. Was planning to use them anyway. Then the lighting problem solves itself. She paused at the door. B. The salvia. The first row was planted by his wife? B looked at her carefully. Yes. Tell me they're going to be on that table. They're going to be on that table, B said. Lily nodded and went to find Clara. Clara took the situation in the way she took everything, without visible alarm and with the immediate practical response of someone who had been managing this estate through complications for a long time. But there was something else in her expression when Lily laid out the revised plan, something that went beyond professional assessment. You've thought this through, Clara said. I had about 4 minutes in the kitchen. That's faster than the previous coordinator, who had a binder system and still fell apart when a guest's dietary restriction changed at the last minute. Clara looked at the notepad. The guests arrive at 6, dinner at 7:30. That gives you 8.5 hours. It's enough if I don't waste any of it. Lily hesitated. Clara, is the owner going to be at this dinner? Clara looked at her. The careful quality was there again. The measured, precise non-expression of someone managing information. He attends every year, she said. I haven't met him. Is there anything specific he needs to know about the changes to the menu? Should I brief him, or does that go through you? A pause that lasted approximately 1 second too long. I'll handle the communication, Clara said. You focus on the dinner. Lily nodded and moved on. She had work to do. The storm hit at noon. It didn't arrive the way summer storms sometimes did, in a sudden vertical collapse of rain that was dramatic but brief. This one moved in horizontally, the wind coming first. A sustained, serious push that rattled the estate's shutters and bent the cypress trees along the south path into uncomfortable angles. And then the rain behind it, not sheets exactly, but a continuous gray pressure that reduced visibility to 50 yards and made the world outside the windows look like an unfinished painting left out in the weather. The power flickered once at 12:40, held, flickered again at 2 o'clock, and held again, barely. Lily was in the kitchen by then and had been for 3 hours. The fish was brined and resting. The potato gratin was assembled and waiting for the oven. The pasta dough was in the cold room. She had made it with Denny's help, a process that had involved considerably more flour on the counter and one moderately catastrophic rolling incident than she would have preferred, but the end result was usable and she had moved on without dwelling on the mess. The charcuterie boards were being assembled at the prep table, and they were, she had to admit, genuinely beautiful. Not in the performed, styled way of catering, but in the honest way of good ingredients arranged by someone who had stopped worrying about what they were supposed to look like and just thought about what would make a person glad to sit down. Marcus appeared in the kitchen at 2:15, soaked from the shoulders up despite a jacket, carrying an armful of cut salvia from the south wall. He set it on the counter with the careful reverence of someone delivering something that mattered. "Last of the good stems," he said. "Got them before the wind took the rest." Lily looked at the flowers. White salvia, imperfect in the way that garden flowers are imperfect. Some stems slightly shorter than others, a few leaves that needed pulling, the blooms a half shade off uniform. Nothing like the tight, forced symmetry of florist ranunculus. They looked like they belonged somewhere, which was exactly what she needed. "They're perfect," she said. Marcus grunted, which was his version of agreement, and went back out into the storm. She arranged the flowers herself, working at the prep counter between pasta sheets and the smell of the gratin beginning to heat in the oven, and she thought about what Bea had told her, the first row, planted by Ethan's wife. And she arranged them with that thought in her hands, which made her more careful than she would otherwise have been. Ethan came to the kitchen door at 3. He stood at the threshold. He didn't come in, she noticed, as though there were a line he had decided not to cross. And he looked at the organized, productive chaos of the kitchen with an expression she couldn't fully read from across the room. "How's it going?" he said. "Better than it should be," she said, without stopping what she was doing. "The gratin smells incredible, which is mostly Bea's doing. The pasta is acceptable, which is mostly Denny's doing. The charcuterie is genuinely good, which is honestly luck. And the fish? The fish I'm confident about." She looked up at him. "How's the storm?" "Settled in. Won't move until after midnight." "So no one's going anywhere?" "No." "Then the guests are here for the duration." "They're in the East Wing rooms. Clara got them settled." Lily nodded, reaching for the next salvia stem. "And Sophie?" "With her sitter in the main house. She's fine. She thinks storms are exciting. She's been making the sitter build a blanket fort. Smart kid." She looked back down at the flowers. "Ethan." "Yeah?" "Whatever happens tonight, the dinner, the food, the whole thing, it's going to be okay." She wasn't sure why she felt the need to say this to him specifically. He wasn't her employer. He had nothing invested in the outcome of the evening as far as she understood, but he had come to the kitchen door and stood there in the rain-gray light of a storm afternoon and looked at what she was doing, and somehow that felt like the kind of moment where something needed to be said. He looked at her for a moment from the doorway. "I know," he said. It came out the same way it had the night before, without the hedging softness of reassurance, without the slightly hollow ring of something said to make a person feel better. Just the direct, settled weight of someone who already believed what they were saying. She went back to the flowers. He stayed at the doorway for another moment, and she was aware of him there, the way you're aware of a light in a room, not intrusively, but as a presence that alters the quality of the space around it. Then he said quietly, "Thank you," and left before she could ask him what he was thanking her for. She thought about it while she finished the arrangements. She didn't arrive at an answer that satisfied her, so she set it aside and went back to the pasta. But by 5:30, the kitchen was running. The dinner was happening. She was sure of it with the particular certainty that comes not from optimism, but from having done the work correctly, from having looked at the actual materials available and built something real from them, rather than hoping for the original plan to somehow reconstitute itself. She had 45 minutes before she needed to be in the dining room to oversee the table setup, and she used them to wash flour off her arms, change her shirt in the small bathroom off the kitchen corridor, repin her hair with the pins she kept in her bag for exactly this kind of situation, and eat half a piece of bread with butter standing over the kitchen sink because she hadn't eaten since 6 a.m. and she would be useless if she passed out during service.
Denny watched her eat the bread with the particular expression of a 22-year-old who had found an adult doing something slightly undignified and didn't know whether to acknowledge it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just, you're going to run a dinner for 18 people in 2 hours, and you're eating bread over the sink." "Best place to eat bread," she said. "No cleanup." He appeared to find this philosophically satisfying and went back to his prep. The dining room was ready at 6:45. She stood at the entrance and looked at it with the quiet private assessment of someone who had built something and needed a moment alone with it before other people arrived to have opinions about it. The table was centered as well as it could be, given the chandelier's position, with the theatrical spots Marcus had found angled at the walls so the light spread warm and indirect across the whole length. The salvia arrangements were every 12 inches down the table, white against the dark wood, imperfect and alive. The candles were lit, 12 of them. The tall tapers Clara had kept in the storage room, and in the storm-dimmed light of the windows they were already doing most of the work. The charcuterie boards were on the sideboard, covered. The hand-calligraphed menus, which she had quietly revised between 3 and 4 p.m., writing out the new courses in her own hand on the backs of the original sheets rather than waste the calligraphy work, were at each place setting. It looked like a dinner, not the dinner she had planned. Something else, something that had grown out of the specific circumstances of this specific island on this specific stormy evening, and it was better for that. More honest. Clara came to stand beside her. "Well," Clara said. "Well," Lily agreed. The salvia was a good choice. Marcus got them just in time. Lily looked at the nearest arrangement. "They belonged here." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a tone that was carefully calibrated to sound like simple logistics, "The host's seat is at the head of the table. He usually arrives after the guests are seated. He doesn't like the entrance before everyone's there. It makes people stand up and makes the whole thing formal before it needs to be." Lily nodded. "I'll keep a seat for him. The one at the head. I didn't put a name card on it." "That's correct." "Clara." Lily looked at her. "What should I know about him? Before tonight, I've been working on his estate for a week and he's been a kind of invisible presence the whole time. People talk around him rather than about him." Clara held her gaze for a moment with the same measured quality she always had, and Lily watched her decide something. "He's a good man who's been through something very difficult and has come out the other side of it with most of himself intact," Clara said. "That's rarer than it sounds." A pause. "He'll appreciate tonight. What you've done with the circumstances you were given. That's the kind of thing he notices." "How do you know what he notices?" "I've worked for him for 6 years, Clara said simply, and left it at that. The guests arrived in the way that groups of people arriving to a formal dinner in a storm always do, slightly windblown and grateful, with the loosened social quality that bad weather tends to produce, as though the inconvenience of the elements had knocked loose some of the formality they had arrived prepared to wear. They were a mixed group, a few older couples who had a long-standing relationship with the estate, 2 younger families, a woman Lily recognized from a photograph as a prominent architect who apparently came every year, and a man in his 70s with a hearing aid and a dark blazer who introduced himself to Lily as, "Thomas, I knew Ethan before any of this," and gestured around the dining room in a way that seemed to encompass more than just the estate. She seated them. She poured the welcome wine, one of the estate's own bottles, which Marcus had retrieved from the cellar, with the specificity of someone who knew exactly which shelf to find it on. She was moving through the room with the focused peripheral attention of someone managing multiple things at once when she heard the architect, whose name was Helena, say to the woman beside her, "I love what she's done with the flowers. Did you know there's a story about that salvia?" Lily didn't stop to listen. She was needed in the kitchen. By 7:15, the service had begun. The charcuterie boards came out first, and she watched the room's reaction with the particular anxiety of someone who has committed fully to a plan they had about 3 hours to develop. The guests looked at the boards, and then they started eating, and then they started talking about what they were eating, and she felt the tension in her shoulders release by approximately 1/3. She was in the kitchen overseeing the first pass of the fish plates when Clara appeared at the door. "He's here," Clara said. "The host?" Lily looked up from the plating. "Good. His seat's ready. I'll come out and..."
"He'll seat himself," Clara said. "He always does. Finish the plates." She finished the plates. Denny and the two serving staff Clara had organized, both islanders, both calm under the pressure of service, took the first course out. Lily counted to 10, let the kitchen settle for a moment, wiped her hands, and walked out to check the room. She pushed open the dining room door and stepped in from the side corridor, and she scanned the table the way she always did when service began, checking the plates, checking the guests, checking the light, making sure the wine was being poured. And then her eyes went to the head of the table. The chair that had been empty when she left was no longer empty. The man sitting in it had dark hair that needed cutting, 2 days of stubble, or possibly 3 by now. He was wearing a jacket she hadn't seen before. Dark gray, fitted, the kind of thing that cost money in the specific way that very good clothes cost money. Not with logos or obvious signals, but with the cut and the fall of the fabric. And he was listening to something Thomas was saying from 3 seats down with the same expression she had watched for 7 mornings in a boathouse. Attentive, still, fully present. Her brain processed the image the way a system processes something it doesn't have a category for. It tried to slot it into an existing framework, found nothing that fit, tried again. The man at the head of the Blackwood Estate dining table, in the chair Clara had told her was reserved for the host of the annual family dinner, was Ethan. Not a different Ethan. Not a resemblance, not a coincidence, not some cousin or brother she hadn't been told about. The same hands, the same jaw, the same quality of listening, that specific way of giving attention that she had experienced every morning for a week in the boathouse over coffee she had taught him to make properly. Ethan Blackwood. The billionaire owner of the island, the estate, the boats, the ferry line, and everything she had looked at every morning for a week and simply assumed wasn't his. She didn't move for long enough that Denny, coming out of the kitchen behind her with a side dish, nearly walked into her back. "You all right?" he said low. She stepped aside without answering him. She stood with her back against the wall of the side corridor and put one hand flat on the cool plaster and breathed. The dining room sounds came through the door. The gentle clink of cutlery, the low conversation, Thomas's voice carrying above the others with the comfortable volume of someone who had been talking in rooms like this for decades. She went over the past 7 days in her mind with the systematic, involuntary thoroughness of someone running a search through their own memory against their will. The morning of the boat. His careful, half-answered responses. I've sat in a lot of interviews, on both sides. His knowledge of the estate's schedule, the guests, the dinner. The way Clara deferred to him in conversation without ever identifying what she was deferring to. The way Marcus had said he's a good man with the specific weight of an employee who had earned the right to say it. The way B spoke about him. The way Sophie had caught herself. When people come to his, and redirected. They all knew. Every person on this island had known, for 7 days, and nobody had told her. She was aware distantly that the dinner needed managing, that she had plates going out and a kitchen running and 18 guests who didn't know anything was wrong. She was aware that she was a professional with a job to do, that this moment was not the appropriate time or place for the thing that was happening inside her chest, which was not grief exactly and not anger exactly, but a compound of both with something beneath them that was worse than either, which was the particular pain of having been sincere with someone who was keeping score of the whole thing from behind a wall you couldn't see. She pushed off the wall. She went back into the kitchen. She managed the rest of the service. The fish course, the pasta, the gratin, the dessert, with the automated precision of someone who has trained herself to function while something private and significant is happening behind her face. She did not look at the head of the table again. She didn't need to. She could feel from across the room each of the few times he looked toward the kitchen door. The dessert was out by 9:15. The guests were in the late stages of dinner, the conversation loud and warm, the wine having done its work, the candles burned down by a third. Thomas was telling a story that had apparently been told before, judging by the way the people around him were smiling in anticipation of a punchline they already knew. Lily was at the sideboard, hands occupied with something she had already forgotten when she heard her name. Not from across the room. From close. From the person who had appeared at her left without her hearing him approach, which should not have been possible given the level of attention she had been paying to the room for the past 2 hours. Lily. She turned.
Ethan, Ethan Blackwood, the name felt like a stone placed in her mouth, was standing 2 feet away. He had gotten up from the table, which she had not noticed because she had been rigidly not looking at it. He was wearing the jacket, and he looked like himself, and also not at all like himself, which was the problem. "I'd like to explain," he said, quietly enough that it didn't carry to the table. She looked at him. She was aware of her own face and what it was doing, and she didn't have enough control over it right now to manage it to neutral, so she didn't try. "You own this island," she said. "Yes." "You own the boats, the ferry." "Yes." "You've owned them the entire time I've been here." "Yes." "And you let me sit on that boat and tell you about my budget for instant noodles, and criticize the owner of the island to his face, and—" She stopped. The dining room sounds were too close. She was intensely aware that there were 16 other people 12 feet away having an evening she was responsible for. She lowered her voice.
"You let me teach you how to make coffee. For a week. In your own boathouse." "It's a boathouse the ferry crew uses," he said, as though this were relevant. "That is not the point, and you know it." He was quiet. He had the decency not to argue, which she was simultaneously grateful for and furious about. "Why?" she said. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He looked at her, and she could see the answer forming. Not an excuse. She could tell even now that he didn't have an excuse, but something more honest and therefore more difficult. "Because you got on that boat and you talked to me like I was a person," he said. "Not a property owner, not a billionaire, not something to be managed or impressed. You argued with me about coffee temperatures, and you talked about your rent, and you told me what you actually thought about things." He paused. "I couldn't remember the last time that happened." "So you kept lying." "I didn't—" He stopped. "I didn't tell you who I was. That's not the same as lying." "From where I'm standing tonight, Ethan, it feels exactly the same." He didn't answer that. She looked at him for a moment. This man she had spent 7 mornings with. This man whose daughter had given her a dinosaur to look after. This man who had said, "So am I," on a dock at sunset with the specific sincerity of someone who doesn't say things they don't mean. And she felt the ground of the past week shift under her feet in the way that ground shifts when you discover it was never what you thought it was. "I need to finish the service," she said. "Lily, I need to finish the service," she said again, and this time he let her go. She went back to the sideboard. She moved through the rest of the evening with her hands and her professionalism and the practice of a person who has learned to keep the private thing separate from the working thing, because that is a skill you develop when you cannot afford to fall apart. But when the guests finally moved to the sitting room at 10 and the kitchen staff began the clear-up, and Denny asked if she was okay with the specific awkwardness of a young man who has noticed something he doesn't know how to address, she said, "Fine, thank you," and walked to the east wing and up the stairs to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed with her coat still on and her bag still over her shoulder. She sat there for a long time, not crying, not yet, just sitting with the weight of it, the specific, thorough feeling of having been open with someone in ways she did not open easily, and discovering that the opening had not been what she thought it was. That the ordinary man she had found comfort in had been, the entire time, the very thing she was wary of, someone with so much more than her that the distance between them had never been real to begin with. She began, quietly and without drama, to pack her bag. The ferry left at first light. She intended to be on it. She packed the way she always packed when she was upset. Methodically, without thinking too hard about what she was doing, because thinking too hard about what she was doing would require her to also think about why she was doing it, and she wasn't ready for that yet. The blazer went in first. Then the notepad, still open to the revised dinner menu in her own handwriting, which she closed without looking at. The small purple triceratops, Gerald, was on the windowsill where she'd set him when she came upstairs, and she stood looking at him for a moment before she picked him up and wrapped him in a t-shirt and put him in the middle of the bag where he wouldn't get crushed. She told herself this was just practical. She told herself a lot of things that night that she mostly didn't believe. The storm had quieted to a steady rain by the time she finished packing. Not gone, just settled into something lower and more persistent, the kind of rain that intends to last and doesn't need to prove anything. She could hear it against the window, a sound that had been the backdrop to everything today, and she thought about the kitchen and the fish, and Marcus bringing in the salvia with both arms full and his jacket soaked through, and Denny's flour-covered forearms, and the moderately catastrophic rolling incident she hadn't dwelled on. She thought about what she'd built today out of nothing and how it had worked, and she thought about the look on Clara's face when she first walked into that dining room at 6:45, and she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She did not sleep. She tried briefly, around midnight, lying on top of the made bed in her clothes with the lamp off and the rain on the window. But her mind kept pulling her back, kept running the reel of the past 7 days against the new information with the relentless, unhelpful thoroughness of a mind trying to reconcile two things that didn't fit. The man on the boat in the faded Henley, the man at the head of the table in the gray jacket, the same man, the same careful listening, the same unhurried attention, the same quiet way of saying things that meant more than they sounded like they meant. Most people don't know what they have when they have it. She thought he was talking about the island. She gave up on sleep at 4 a.m. and sat up and turned the lamp back on and looked at the packed bag on the chair by the door and thought about the ferry schedule. First boat was at 6. She could make it if she left by 5:30. The storm had quieted enough that the crossing would be rough but manageable. She'd crossed in worse, or at least she assumed so based on no direct experience with rough water crossings, which she decided not to examine too carefully. She was still sitting there, lamp on, bag packed, coat across her lap, when someone knocked on her door at 4:45. She went still. The knock was careful. 2 quiet taps, the kind of knock that was trying not to wake anyone else on the hall and was aware of itself being an imposition at this hour. She didn't answer. A pause. Then, from the other side of the door, in a voice that was not Ethan's, "Miss Carter, it's Clara. I know you're awake. I can see the light under the door." Lily looked at the gap at the base of the door. The lamp was absolutely casting light. She had no defense against this. She crossed the room and opened the door. Clara was standing in the hallway, in a dark cardigan over a white shirt, her silver-streaked hair down rather than pinned, which made her look less like a professional and more like a person, which Lily found unexpectedly disarming. She was holding 2 cups of something that steamed. "Tea," Clara said. "Can I come in?" Lily stepped back. Clara came in, handed her one of the cups, looked at the packed bag on the chair without commenting on it, and sat in the small armchair in the corner with the settled manner of someone who had decided to be somewhere and was not going to be hurried away from it. Lily sat back on the edge of the bed and wrapped both hands around the cup and waited. "I owe you an explanation," Clara said. "You owe me quite a lot more than that," Lily said, "but an explanation is a start." Clara accepted this without flinching. "You're right, and I'm not going to try to tell you that we were acting in your interest because that's not entirely true. We were acting in his." She looked at her own cup. "When you came aboard that first morning, the morning you got on the wrong boat, I got a call from Ethan before you even reached the gate. He told me someone had boarded by mistake, and he'd given her a ride and she was coming for the interview." A pause. "He sounded different." "Different how?" "Lighter." Clara said the word carefully, like she'd chosen it over several alternatives. "He hasn't sounded like that in a long time. Not since before." She didn't specify before what. She didn't need to. "I should have told you that first day. I know that. But he asked me to let things be for a while, and I trusted his judgment because I've trusted his judgment for 6 years. And in this particular case, I think I was wrong to." Lily looked at the steam rising from her cup. "He told you not to tell me." "He told me to let him handle it in his own time, which is different and also insufficient." Clara looked at her steadily. "He didn't plan to deceive you indefinitely, Lily. He's not that kind of man, but he's also a man who spent 3 years building walls because walls kept things functional after his wife died, and his daughter was 2 years old, and he had a company to run, and he couldn't afford to fall apart. And then you got on his boat and talked to him like a normal human being for 45 minutes, and he didn't know what to do with that." She paused. "So he did nothing, which I should have corrected." Lily was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had softened further. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's 4:45 in the morning and you're packed and the ferry leaves at 6. "That's not a reason. That's an observation." "I'm telling you this now," Clara said, with the particular deliberateness of someone choosing to say something they have been holding for a while. Because I made the same mistake once, a long time ago. I let someone I trusted keep a secret that wasn't only his to keep, and by the time the truth came out, the damage was already done. I was too proud to hear the explanation. I told myself I'd been made a fool of. She turned her cup in her hands. I've had 23 years to think about whether I was right. Lily looked at her. Were you? About being hurt? Yes, absolutely. Clara met her eyes. About leaving? No. The silence after that had a different quality than the silence before it. Lily sat with it, and with the tea and with the sound of the rain dropping toward nothing. I'm not saying don't be angry, Clara said. You have every right to be angry. What I'm saying is that there is a difference between a man who lied to take something from you and a man who said too little because he was afraid of losing something he didn't quite know how to name yet. She stood, smoothing the front of her cardigan. That distinction matters. Whether you decide it matters enough is entirely up to you. She moved to the door. Clara, Lily said. She stopped. The salvia. The first row. His wife planted it? Anna. Clara said the name with the quiet care of someone who had said it many times in the privacy of their own mind. She had a thing about white flowers, said they looked like they were paying attention. Lily looked at the window, at the dark and the rain. He kept them. He tends them himself, every spring. A pause at the door. He's not an easy man to know, Lily, but he's a true one. That's rarer, in my experience. She opened the door. The tea will get cold. She left, pulling the door gently behind her. Tut. Lily sat for another 20 minutes. She drank the tea. She looked at the bag. She looked at the window, where the darkness was beginning its slow early concession to the gray that comes before actual dawn. Not light yet, just the beginning of the withdrawal of dark, a distinction that matters more on some mornings than others. She picked up the bag, set it back down, picked it up again. She was still standing in the middle of the room with the bag in her hand when she made the decision, which was not so much a decision as an arrival. The moment when you realize the choosing has already been done somewhere beneath the level of conscious deliberation, and what you're doing now is just acknowledging it. She set the bag down, left it where it was, and went out. The path to the harbor was slick with rain, and the sky above it was the particular dark gray of an hour that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. She had her coat on and her shoes were wrong for the wet gravel, but she walked quickly and the cold helped, the way cold sometimes does, sharpening the edges of things, cutting through the accumulated weight of a sleepless night. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, his footsteps, on the gravel path that ran parallel to hers from the direction of the main house, moving faster than she was. She turned and he was there, 20 yards back, also in a coat, also not dressed for the rain, and he saw her at the same moment she saw him. He stopped. She stopped. They stood on the wet gravel in the pre-dawn with 20 yards and approximately 7 days of unresolved history between them, and looked at each other. Then he walked toward her and she didn't move, and when he was close enough that she could see his face clearly, the exhaustion in it, the 2 days of stubble that was probably 3 days by now, the same quality of attention he always gave her, but rawer somehow, less composed. He said, I'm not going to ask you to stay. Good, she said, because I'm not sure I'm staying. I know. He stopped a few feet from her. His hands were in his coat pockets and he was looking at her directly, without the management of expression that people put on when they're preparing to explain themselves in a way designed to land favorably. He just looked at her, and she could see it was costing him something. I wanted to tell you before you left. Everything, not just the part you already know. She waited. He looked down at the gravel for a moment, then back up. I bought the Ferry company 4 years ago, he said. After Anna died, I came here because Sophie needed somewhere quiet, and I needed somewhere I could actually breathe, and I bought the island because I could, and I bought the Ferry company because it was part of the island's infrastructure, and I didn't want it going under. He paused. I started running the morning ferry myself about a year in. Clara thought I'd lost my mind. Marcus thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Were you? Probably. He said it without self-pity, just accuracy. But also, when I was on the boat, nobody knew who I was. People got on and they were tired, or they were in a hurry, or they were just people going somewhere, and they talked to me the way you talk to someone who operates your ferry. Not to a billionaire. Not to someone they needed something from. He took a breath. I'd forgotten what that felt like. A long time before Anna died, even. Once the money got to a certain point, people stop seeing you and start seeing what you represent. And that does something to you, over years. You start editing yourself in every room before you even open your mouth, because you know the room isn't really for you anyway. Lily looked at him. And on the boat, it was different. On the boat, I was nobody specific, just a person going somewhere and taking other people along. He pulled one hand out of his pocket, looked at it briefly, put it back. When you got on that morning and started talking to me, actually talking about your rent and your interview and why you wanted the job, I didn't know what to do with it. I kept thinking I'd tell you at the dock. Then I thought I'd tell you when you came for the interview. Then Clara had already not told you, and a day had passed, and it got harder every morning that went by. Because the longer you waited, the worse it was going to be. Yes. And you knew that. Yes. He met her eyes. I'm not going to tell you I had a clean reason. I didn't. I was selfish with it. You were the first person in 3 years who looked at me and saw a person rather than a situation, and I held on to that longer than I had any right to. The harbor was visible now from where they were standing, the dock lights still on, reflecting in the rain-wet boards, the ferry at its slip, and the water beyond it going slowly from black to dark gray in the early morning light. One other figure was at the dock, the ferry operator checking the mooring lines, going about the quiet work of a boat being made ready for its first crossing. Lily looked at the ferry, then at Ethan. Sophie said most people want something from you, she said. Sophie hears things. She's right, though, isn't she? She usually is. Something moved across his face. You never wanted anything, Lily. You told me that first morning you were annoyed at me for stealing my boat, your words. And then you taught me to make coffee and argued with me about everything and treated the people who work here like they mattered, and never once asked me what it would be worth to me. He paused. That's not a small thing. I don't know if you understand how not small it is. She looked down at the wet gravel. Her shoes were soaked through. She could feel it. Her coat wasn't quite thick enough for this temperature. She was standing in the gray pre-dawn on a gravel path on a private island, talking to a man she had spent a week being simple and honest with, who had spent that same week keeping the largest possible fact about himself quietly in his pocket. I told you things on that boat, she said. Private things. About my apartment and my money and what I was afraid of. She looked up. You knew the whole time that you were the person I was applying to work for. You knew what was at stake for me. Yes. And you just listened. Yes. Ethan. She said his name with the weight it had accumulated over 7 days and a sleepless night and a morning on wet gravel. That wasn't nothing. What you withheld, it wasn't a small omission. I know that, he said. And then, after a pause that cost him something, I'm sorry. That's not enough. But it's true. She looked at him. He didn't dress the apology up or pad it with context or try to walk it back into something more comfortable. He just said it and let it be what it was, the same way he said everything, without decoration, without the management of impression. She had noticed this about him from the first morning on the boat, that he said things plainly, even the hard things, even when it would have been easier to say them sideways. It was one of the things she had trusted about him. It was still true, even now. She didn't say anything. She looked at the ferry. There's something else, he said. She looked back. Yesterday, while you were running the kitchen before the dinner, I was on a call. He paused. A business matter I've been working on for months. A group that wants to acquire the island. Not the estate specifically, a development deal. They want to build a resort complex, 500 rooms, full commercial infrastructure. The offer is significant. He said the word significant the way people say it when it means something genuinely large, not as a qualifier. Why are you telling me this? Because they called again this morning, 6 a.m. They want an answer today. He looked at her steadily. I told them no. She went still. When? An hour ago. Before you knew whether I was leaving or staying. Yes. She stared at him. The light was changing now, properly. The gray going warmer, the first direction of actual dawn becoming apparent behind the cloud cover. Not visible yet, but sensed, the way you sense a change before it arrives. A bird somewhere on the island was making its first attempt at noise. That's insane, she said. Probably. That's... Ethan, that's your business decision. That has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with what kind of man I want to be, he said, and his voice was quiet and completely steady. Sophie has a life here. She knows every person on this island by name. She has her boats and her dinosaurs and her boots and the birthday party every summer where Marcus puts lanterns in the cypress trees, and she runs around until she falls asleep somewhere impractical. He paused. Selling this island would give her everything except the thing she actually has, which is a home. I'm not trading that for a number, regardless of what that number is. Lily looked at him for a long moment. You would have made that decision anyway, she said. The island, Sophie. You would have said no whether I was here or not. He didn't look away. Probably, he said honestly, but you made me see it clearly enough to say it out loud, which is different. She looked back at the ferry. The operator had finished with the mooring lines and was doing something with the engine cover now. The water behind him was going lighter, the dark green of early morning beginning to show through the gray. In an hour, it would be the color it had been that first morning, the color she had watched from the passenger bench while Ethan navigated, and she talked too much, and he listened in the way he always did. She thought about Clara in the hallway at 4:45 with a cup of tea and 23 years of hindsight. She thought about Sophie's rain boots and the diplomatic relations between two stegosauruses and the absolute seriousness with which a 4-year-old had trusted her with Gerald's care. She thought about Bea saying he's getting there, and the way it had sounded like something earned rather than given. And she thought about that first morning, the boat pulling away from the slip, the salt wind, the water going from dark to light. And the feeling she'd had, arriving on this island with wet shoes and a water stain on her blazer, that she had somehow managed to land in the right place despite everything. She was quiet for a long time. The ferry operator started the engine. It turned over with the same low rumble she'd heard on the first morning, the sound carrying across the water and the gravel in the still gray air. You should have told me, she said finally. Yes, he said, I should have. And I'm still angry about it. You have every right to be. I'm going to stay angry about it for a while, she said. Not forever, but a while. He nodded. He looked like he had expected less than this and wasn't sure what to do with the surplus. I'm not staying because of the island, she said, or what you did with the business offer. I want to be clear about that. I know. I'm staying because of the coffee, she said. You still make it wrong half the time, and someone needs to supervise. Something happened to his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the ghost of a smile, not the almost expression that had been its substitute, but an actual one, unguarded and slightly crooked and completely unmanaged. And it changed the whole structure of his face in a way that made him look startlingly like Sophie for just a moment. She looked away from it before it could do more damage. I'm going back to get my shoes changed, she said, looking down at her soaked feet. And then I'm going to find Clara and tell her I'd like a proper contract, not a probationary period, because I think I've earned that after yesterday's dinner. You've more than earned it, he said. I know, she said. I'm just telling you because you're the one who'll be signing it. She turned and walked back up the gravel path toward the estate. She heard him not following her, heard the particular quality of someone standing still and watching, and she didn't look back. But at the bend in the path, where the cypress trees on either side made a brief corridor before the estate gates came into view, she stopped. She turned around. He was still there, 20 yards down the path, in the gray morning light with the harbor at his back, and he was watching her with the same attention he had always watched her with from the first morning on the water. No more secrets, she said. It wasn't a question. No more secrets, he said. She nodded once. Then she went through the gate. Clara was in the main hall when she came in, and Lily had the distinct impression that Clara had been there for a while, in the low-lit corridor with her tea and her silver hair down and the specific stillness of someone waiting for a thing to resolve.
Well, Clara said. I want a permanent contract, Lily said, starting Monday. Clara looked at her for a moment, then she set her tea down on the hall table and picked up the small leather portfolio she apparently kept with her at all times, like a professional extension of her person, and opened it to a clean page. Monday's fine, she said. Your salary requirements? Lily named a number. Clara made a note without visible reaction, which meant Lily had probably aimed too low, but she'd fix that in 6 months when she had the dinner and several other events in her portfolio. She was already thinking about the autumn calendar. There was a harvest event Marcus had mentioned that had been handled sloppily the previous 2 years, but that was Monday's problem. Clara, she said. Clara looked up from the portfolio. I'm sorry I didn't answer the door faster at 4:45. You answered, Clara said. That's what matters. Lily nodded and went to change her shoes. She found Sophie at breakfast, which Sophie was having in the kitchen with Denny, who had apparently stayed the night in the staff quarters, rather than navigate the storm home, and had been recruited into a game involving the remaining dinosaur figurines and a complex geopolitical scenario between the Salt and Pepper Shakers. Sophie was in her yellow rain boots again, and she looked up when Lily came in with the complete attention of a child whose relationship with time is uncomplicated. Gerald's wet, Sophie said. Lily looked down at her coat pocket, where the small purple triceratops was slightly damp from the morning. She had not consciously chosen to take him outside. She had just packed him and then unzipped the bag in the pre-dawn and put him in her pocket, which was a decision she was going to allow herself not to analyze. He went for a walk, she said. He's fine. He doesn't like being wet. He's braver than he looks. Sophie appeared to weigh this, found it acceptable, and returned to the geopolitical situation between the Salt and Pepper Shakers. Denny caught Lily's eye over Sophie's head with an expression that communicated approximately 12 things at once, without saying any of them, and she gave him a small nod that communicated back, yes, I know, and I'd rather not discuss it. She poured herself coffee, properly, because the camping setup had been moved to the kitchen at some point in the past week, and Ethan's improvements had followed it, and the coffee was better than it had been. She sat at the kitchen table across from Sophie and Gerald, who was wet, and the diplomatic summit between condiments, and drank her coffee while the morning came in through the window, and the storm finally, after a night of effort, let the island go. Outside, the water was going green again, the particular green of the morning she had arrived, the color she had looked at from the passenger bench of a boat she had no right to be on, and thought, without examining why, this is somewhere I could stay. She drank her coffee. She had been right about that, at least. The contract was signed on Monday morning in Clara's office, with a pen that needed to be shaken twice before it would write properly. Lily noticed this and said nothing about it, which Clara appeared to appreciate. The salary was higher than what Lily had named. Clara had made a quiet adjustment without explanation, sliding the paper across the desk with the number already filled in, and Lily had looked at it for a moment and then signed without comment because some corrections don't require discussion. They just require acknowledgement. First order of business, Clara said, retrieving the contract and sliding it into a manila folder, is the autumn harvest event. It's in 10 weeks. Marcus has notes from the previous 2 years, which I recommend reading only as a record of what not to repeat. What went wrong? The first year, the caterer canceled 48 hours out, and the backup plan was inadequate. Clara paused. The second year, the event coordinator decided the theme should be industrial chic, which resulted in metal scaffolding in the courtyard that Marcus is still quietly furious about. I'll read the notes, Lily said, and I'll talk to Marcus. He'll like that. Clara closed the folder. He already likes you, which is notable. Marcus has strong opinions about scaffolding. Lily picked up her bag and stood, and then stopped. Does Ethan have input on the events, preferences, things he specifically wants kept or changed? Clara considered this. He trusts the estate to run well. What he cares about is whether the people here are treated well, staff, guests, everyone. She looked at Lily over the desk. He'll tell you himself if you ask him. He's better at that now than he used to be. At telling people things, Lily said. At telling people things, Clara confirmed, without irony. Lily went to find Marcus. The first 2 weeks after the dinner were not easy,
and it would be dishonest to say otherwise. She had told Ethan she was going to be angry for a while, and she was. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't give him the cold silence or the pointed distance that anger sometimes produces in people who want their anger to be seen and felt. It was quieter than that. A recalibration. She went about her work and her mornings in the boathouse and her conversations with Sophie and Bea and Marcus, and she did all of it with the same genuine care she had always brought to it. But there was a layer of herself she kept held back from Ethan specifically, a door she had closed and was not yet ready to reopen. He didn't push it. This was the thing she had not entirely expected, that he would understand the difference between a door being closed and a door being locked, and would treat them accordingly. He showed up to the boathouse in the mornings and made coffee, improving steadily to the point where she now had to find smaller corrections to offer. And he talked to her about ordinary things, the boats, Sophie's latest philosophical positions on various subjects, a problem with the Eastern Docks mooring that Marcus had flagged. He did not bring up the dinner or the harbor or the pre-dawn conversation on the gravel path. He just showed up and was present and gave her the room she had not asked for directly, but that he had understood she needed. That, she thought, on a morning about 10 days in, watching him attempt a pour-over with the careful concentration of a man who had accepted that this was now a skill he was going to acquire, whether it came naturally or not. That was not a small thing either. A man who could sit with someone's guarded distance without trying to close it by force was a man who had learned something difficult about patience. You didn't learn that easily. You learned it by being on the other side of it first. "Better," she said when he handed her the cup. He looked at it, then at her. "Is it actually better? Or are you being kind?" "When have I ever been kind about your coffee?" He thought about this. "Never." "Then it's actually better." He sat down on his crate and drank his own cup with the cautious expression of someone tasting their own work and trying to be objective about it. "It tastes like coffee now," he said, "less like warm water that was near coffee once. That's significant progress. High praise. Don't push it." He almost smiled, and she almost smiled back, and they sat in the boathouse in the early morning with the water going its usual colors outside. And it was not the same as before. It was different, shaped differently, with the awareness of what had happened between them sitting in the room like furniture that had been moved. But it was not worse than before. It was just more honest, which is to say more complicated, which is to say more real. Sophie did not appear to notice that anything had shifted, which was either a testament to the resilience of 4-year-olds or evidence that she had noticed everything and had made a quiet executive decision not to let it alter her behavior. Lily suspected the latter. Sophie was not a child who missed things. She arrived at the boathouse on the third morning after the contract signing with both stegosauruses, Gerald, and a new addition, a small orange diplodocus she introduced as Margaret. "Margaret is Gerald's advisor," Sophie explained, settling herself on the large crate with the authority of someone establishing facts rather than offering them for debate. "What does she advise him on?" Lily asked. "Mostly weather, and which biscuits are worth it." "Invaluable expertise." "She's very experienced." Sophie arranged Margaret and Gerald side by side on the windowsill with focused deliberation. "Daddy says you're staying." Lily looked at Ethan, who was at the workbench and had his back to her. The back of his neck did something that might have been a deliberate act of stillness. "I'm staying," Lily confirmed. "Good." Sophie straightened Margaret's position slightly. Gerald was worried. "Gerald doesn't need to worry." "I know, I told him." Sophie looked up at her with her father's particular quality of direct attention. "Are you still mad at Daddy?" A brief silence. Ethan's back remained very still. "A little," Lily said honestly, because she had learned early that Sophie received honesty better than she received management. Sophie appeared to find this acceptable. "He felt bad," she said. "He made me pancakes twice. He only does that when he feels bad." "Did you tell him to make them?" Sophie considered the ethics of this question carefully. "I didn't tell him not to," she said. Lily looked at the back of Ethan's head, where she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was trying very hard not to react in any direction. "That was very wise of you," she said to Sophie. "I know," Sophie said, and returned to the diplomatic arrangement of her advisors.
The anger moved through her the way weather moved through the island. Not gone in a day, not permanent, but with its own pace and its own logic that couldn't be hurried by wanting it to be over. There were mornings when she woke up and it felt distant and manageable, a fact about the past rather than a live current in the present. There were other mornings when she came down to the kitchen and found Ethan already there, making coffee with the camping setup he'd moved permanently to the counter. And something would tighten in her chest that was equal parts residual hurt and the specific frustration of caring about someone who had handled you badly, which is its own particular form of inconvenient. She did not pretend these mornings weren't happening, but she also did not perform them, did not use them as leverage or as weather of her own to make him navigate. She simply felt what she felt and went to work, and the days accumulated, and the island did what islands do in the slow transition from summer to autumn. The light changed its angle, the seagrass dried to gold, the mornings got sharper at the edges in the particular way that makes you notice air again after a season of it being simply there. At the end of the third week, on a morning that had the specific quality of a season definitively ending, she arrived at the boathouse and he had the coffee ready. Not attempting, not in progress. Ready. 2 cups, set out on the workbench, steam rising, the pour-over equipment already cleaned and put away. She looked at it. "I timed the water temperature," he said, from the doorway where he'd apparently been watching the water. 32 seconds off the boil. And I let the bloom go 45 seconds before I started the pour. She picked up her cup, tried it. It was good. Not great. He over-extracted slightly. The finish had a little too much bitterness, but it was genuinely, competently good in a way that required actual understanding of what he was doing rather than just following instructions. "You practiced," she said, "every morning this week, when you weren't here yet." She looked at him. He was in the doorway with his own cup and the early light on his face, and he looked tired in the way of someone who had not been sleeping well, which she had not let herself notice too closely because noticing it too closely would have made the last 3 weeks significantly harder to sustain. "Why?" she said. He looked at his cup. "Because you're good at it, and you put in the time to teach me, and I wanted to be someone who actually learned." He paused. "Also, Sophie told me that if I couldn't make decent coffee by October, she was going to ask B to adopt her, so there was some urgency." Lily pressed her lips together against something that wanted to be a laugh, and was not willing to be a laugh just yet. "It's still slightly over-extracted. I know, I'm working on it. You need to stop the pour at 2 minutes 15, not 2:30. The last 15 seconds is where the bitterness comes from." 2:15, he repeated, like he was filing it. She sat down on her stool. He came in from the doorway and sat on his crate, and they drank their coffee and looked at the water, and it was the closest it had been to the mornings before the dinner. Not identical, still carrying the shape of what had happened, but with the anger having moved back from the foreground and settled into something quieter, something that was changing its nature without her forcing it. "Ethan," she said. I'm not angry anymore." He looked at her. There's still something there," she said, trying to get it accurate, because she owed him accuracy if nothing else. "But it's not the same thing it was. It's more like," she searched for it, "a scar. Not an open thing, something that happened that I'm going to know the shape of for a long time, but that isn't hurting in the same way." He held his cup in both hands and looked at her with the full, steady attention she had known from the first morning. And there was something in it now that was different from before. Less defended, she thought, less composed at the edges. He was letting her see something he had been in the habit of not showing. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the same apology as the one on the gravel path. That had been a proper, necessary apology for a specific wrong. This one was something else, smaller and more personal, the kind of sorry that doesn't resolve anything but means something anyway. Not just for the secret, for making you feel like you were the only one in the room who didn't know what room you were in. She looked at the water. That's a good way to put it. It took me 3 weeks to find the right way to put it. I know. She looked back at him. I could tell you were composing. He almost smiled again. Was it obvious? Only to someone who was watching. They sat with that. The water outside had the golden light of late September on it,
That particular quality of autumn water that makes everything look like a painting that's been varnished. Deeper colors, sharper contrasts, the kind of beauty that announces itself by being slightly too much. I want to try again, he said. Not from where we were, from here. She looked at him. Here is more complicated than where we were. I know. I have opinions about your coffee and how you run your estate events, and at least 3 things Marcus has told me about the dock maintenance situation that I'm going to bring up formally with Clara next week. I know about those things. And I'm going to keep my position, the one I earned. I'm not adjusting it because of whatever this is. I wouldn't want you to. And I'm keeping the title too. Event coordinator. Not whatever it might be convenient to call it later. Lily. He said her name with a directness that stopped her. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm asking if you'd be willing to have coffee with me in the morning and mean it again. She looked at him for a moment. 2:15 on the pour, she said. 2:15, he said. Then yes, she said. I'm willing to do that. The autumn event came together. The way things come together when you know what you're doing and you've done your research and you've talked to the right people in the right order. Not effortlessly, because nothing that matters happens effortlessly, but with the particular competence of someone working within their actual capability rather than reaching beyond it and hoping. Marcus's notes from the previous 2 years were as described, a record of what not to repeat. She read them the way she read all failure reports, looking past the surface of what went wrong to the decisions that had preceded it. The caterer who canceled had been chosen on price rather than reliability. The industrial chic scaffolding had been the idea of an outside consultant who had never been to the island and was working from photographs. The lesson both years was the same. Decisions made about this place by people who didn't understand this place were going to produce results that didn't fit this place. She planned the harvest event entirely from the island outward. Bee handled the food, which was local and seasonal, and built around what was actually growing and what the island's small fishing pier was actually catching. Marcus ran the outdoor setup, lanterns in the cypress trees, which he told her he'd suggested 2 years ago and been overruled both times, and which turned out to be exactly right, transforming the south lawn at dusk into something that looked like it had always been exactly this way. She hired musicians from the mainland, but she drove over herself to hear them play first, which was something the previous coordinator had not apparently thought to do, and it showed. She arranged the island's own flat-bottomed boats along the harbor for the arriving guests, which Ethan had suggested one morning in the boathouse in his offhand way. People like arriving somewhere by water. It changes how they see the place. And which turned out to be, as his offhand suggestions tended to be, simply correct. The event ran on a Saturday in mid-October. 60 people. Outdoor dinner on the south lawn, the lanterns doing exactly what Marcus had always believed they would do. The food so locally specific that 3 of the guests asked Bee for recipes, and she gave them out on handwritten cards she had apparently prepared in advance, which Lily had not organized and did not ask about. Some people simply know what they're doing. She was at the edge of the lawn at 9 p.m., at the point in an event when most of the active management has been done, and what remains is maintenance and watching when Ethan came to stand beside her. He was in a dark jacket, not the gray one from the dinner, a different one, slightly less formal. And he was carrying 2 glasses of wine, and he held one out without asking, and she took it. The lanterns work, he said. Marcus is insufferably right about them. He knows it too. I saw his face when they came on. Lily looked at the lawn. 60 people in the warm October evening, the long tables and the good food, and the cypress trees doing exactly what Marcus had promised they would do, and the water visible beyond the south edge of the property, going dark and gold and dark again in the lantern light. Sophie was at the far end of the lawn, nominally in the custody of her sitter, but practically in the custody of Thomas, who had come again this year and who had apparently adopted Sophie as an honorary grandchild sometime in the past and was currently allowing her to explain something about Margaret the Diplodocus, with the deep, attentive interest of a man who had lived long enough to know what was actually worth listening to. She's going to talk his ear off, Lily said. He loves it, Ethan said. He doesn't have grandchildren. He's been telling me for 2 years I need to give Sophie more adults to practice on. She doesn't need practice. Lily said. She's already better at it than most adults. He was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter. There was the look again. The one she had seen in the reflection of the boathouse window on the 5th morning. The one that was almost painful in its openness. He wasn't trying to manage it tonight, which was new, or at least new in front of her. She asked me last week if you were going to be here for her birthday, he said. When's her birthday? December, the 22nd. She wants a dog again this year. Are you getting her a dog? I've been looking into it, he said, in the tone of someone who has already made the decision and is maintaining the fiction of still considering it. Ethan. What? You're getting her a dog. He looked at his wine. Gerald would probably like a dog. Gerald would be horrified by a dog, and you know it. Gerald is adaptable. Gerald is a 6-inch plastic triceratops. He's Gerald, Ethan said with the full seriousness that the subject apparently warranted. He contains multitudes. Lily laughed. An actual unguarded laugh, the kind that came out before she had time to arrange her face, and she felt Ethan look at her when it happened. Not intrusively, but with the specific quality of someone registering something they had been waiting for. She let it be what it was. She didn't pull it back or smooth it over. I'll be here for her birthday, she said. She'll want to know what kind of cake you want too, he said. She insists on choosing everyone's cake. It's not negotiable. What does she usually choose? Chocolate with the buttercream that has too much sugar in it. She thinks it should taste like cake and also dessert at the same time. That's a coherent philosophy. She has a lot of them, he said, and the warmth in his voice when he said it was not the performed warmth of a parent presenting their child well, but the real kind. The kind that comes from having been in the daily, unglamorous, difficult, sometimes 4 a.m. in the dark presence of a small person for 4 years, and having arrived at genuine, uncomplicated delight in who they are. Lily looked at Sophie, who had now apparently finished her presentation to Thomas, and was sitting beside him with Margaret in her lap, and his enormous hand resting gently on her shoulder, both of them watching the musicians with the same expression of people who were exactly where they wanted to be. She thought about what Bea had said. He's getting there. And she thought it was the right way to describe it. Not arrived. Getting there. Still in motion, still being shaped by the ongoing fact of living, which was the only kind of person worth knowing. November arrived with the island's particular version of cold, which was not the hard cold of inland winters, but the wet, penetrating cold of a place surrounded by water, the kind that got into your coat before you were outside long enough to notice it coming. Lily bought a better coat. She had not owned a coat adequate to actual winter for approximately 6 years, having lived her adult life in the calculation that coats cost money she didn't have, and she would manage with what she had, which was something she had accepted as a permanent condition and had now, quietly and without ceremony, stopped accepting. This was a small thing. It was also not small at all. She noticed other things changing gradually in the same unannounced way. She had stopped calculating, at the back of her mind, how long she could stay here before something fell apart. She had stopped treating her position as provisional even after the contract made it official. She had stopped half expecting each morning to find that the version of this life she had been living was going to reveal itself as something less permanent than it felt. These were the changes that nobody celebrates because nobody announces them. They happen in the ordinary moments, making coffee in the morning and knowing there will be another morning, walking to the boathouse and not thinking about whether you'll still be walking to the boathouse next month. They are the evidence of a life taking root, and they are invisible until you think back and try to locate when they happened, and find that you can't, because they happened too slowly to be a moment. She mentioned this to Bea one afternoon in November while they were working through the menu for the December events. Not in so many words. More the way she sometimes said things sideways, which was a habit she had developed and was not sure she wanted to lose. I bought a proper coat, she said. Bea looked at her. Like a winter coat, a real one. Bea continued chopping for a moment. About time, she said. I haven't owned a real winter coat since I was 24. That's too long to be cold. I know. Lily looked at the menu notes in front of her. I keep thinking about the woman I was on that ferry, she said, 4 months ago, the one who was writing interview addresses on her hand and missing the public boat and throwing herself onto a stranger's... She stopped. onto what she thought was a public boat. You were determined, B said. I was desperate, Lily said. There's a difference. Is there? B set down the knife and looked at her. Determined people think they're being desperate from the inside. That's what determination feels like, usually. It's only from the outside that it looks like something admirable. Lily thought about this. That's either wise or it's rationalization. Probably both, B said, and picked up the knife again. Most wisdom is. Ethan found the coat one morning in early December, when she had left it on the workbench hook in the boathouse while she was adjusting something on one of the boats at Marcus's request. A small job, rethreading a line that had frayed, the kind of thing she was slowly learning the vocabulary of, because you couldn't live on an island for 4 months without absorbing some of the language of boats, whether you intended to or not. He was looking at it when she came back in. New coat? He said. November happened, she said. I made an executive decision. He looked at her. The morning light was doing its usual thing to the boathouse, the low sideways quality that made everything look considered, intentional. She had stopped trying to find another word for how the boathouse looked in the morning and had accepted that this was just what it looked like, and that was part of why she came here. It looks warm, he said. It's extremely warm. It's the warmest thing I've ever owned. She took it off the hook and put it on. I'm thinking of sleeping in it. You could, he said seriously. The east wing gets cold in December. I know. I've been... She stopped. Wait. Do you know that because you know it's cold in the east wing, or because you've been monitoring the heating system in my specific room? He looked at his coffee. The estate has a building management system. I occasionally check it. Ethan. For all the rooms. Ethan. Marcus flagged the East Wing as a concern in October. The East Wing has 12 rooms. He was quiet. If you've adjusted my room's heating specifically, she said, I need you to tell me so I can decide how I feel about it. He looked at her. I asked the building management company to flag any rooms running below 65 degrees, he said carefully. Yours came up twice in November. She held his gaze for a moment. And I had them adjust it. She looked at the water. Thought about being cold in November in a room on a private island and having someone quietly, without announcement, fix it. Thought about what it meant that he had done this without telling her, and whether it was another thing kept quiet, another piece of information withheld, and decided that it was not, that it was something else entirely, the small and unglamorous version of care that doesn't announce itself because announcing it would change what it is. Thank you, she said. It's a building management... Ethan, thank you. He looked at her. The almost smile came, and this time he let it fully arrive, the slightly crooked one she had seen for the first time on the harbor path that morning, the one that looked like Sophie. You're welcome, he said. Sophie's birthday was on a Tuesday, and it was chaos in the best possible way. The dog had arrived 2 weeks earlier, a brown and white spaniel of no strong pedigree whose name had been changed 4 times since his arrival and currently stood at captain, which Sophie had arrived at through a democratic process that had involved both stegosauruses, Gerald and Margaret, whose vote apparently counted double on matters of nomenclature. Captain did not share Gerald's reservations about boats. Captain had no reservations about anything, which was both his greatest quality and his primary liability, as he had already successfully relocated 3 of Marcus's gardening gloves, 1 of Ethan's work boots, and a kitchen towel to locations that had not yet been fully determined. The birthday was in the main hall, which Lily had decorated the previous evening. Not formally, not like an event, but like a birthday for a 4-year-old, which meant an amount of color that she would not have used for anything she was professionally responsible for, and which Sophie had approved by walking in and going completely still for 3 seconds before spinning in a circle with her arms out, which was the highest form of praise she offered. There were 16 people, which was approximately every person who lived and worked on the island, plus Thomas, who had driven 4 hours and taken a ferry and arrived the evening before with a wrapped package the size of a small refrigerator that he refused to explain. There was the cake, chocolate, buttercream, the correct ratio of too much sugar, which B had made with Sophie supervising from a stool at the counter from 7 a.m., which meant that B had started at 5:30 and done most of the actual work before the supervisor arrived, but that was not a detail anyone was going to burden Sophie with. Lily was in the kitchen at noon helping Bea with the lunch spread that preceded the cake, when Sophie appeared at her elbow with Captain at her heels. "Is Gerald coming to my party?" Sophie asked. Lily looked down at her. "Gerald is in my bag. He should be out. It's a party." "You're absolutely right." Lily went to her bag, retrieved Gerald, and placed him on the kitchen windowsill facing the hall. "He has a good view from there." Sophie inspected his position and approved it. Captain sat beside the windowsill and looked at Gerald with the alert, optimistic expression of a dog who has not yet learned that plastic triceratopses are not interactive. Sophie addressed this directly. "Captain," she said, "that's Gerald. He's very old and important. We respect him." Captain continued looking at Gerald with undiminished optimism. "He'll learn," Sophie said, with the patient authority of someone who has committed to a long-term project. Lily looked at Sophie, at her yellow rain boots, which she was still wearing, at her dark hair that was Ethan's, at the small and absolute certainty with which she moved through her own birthday, and felt something that she had no good word for, which was not love exactly, not yet, not the settled and tested kind, but the beginning of it, the version that exists before it knows its own name. She thought about what she had been 4 months ago on a ferry she had boarded by mistake. She thought about the ink on her hand and the water stain on her blazer, and the frantic, precarious feeling of a life being held together by proximity to disaster. She thought about the fact that she had boarded the wrong boat. She had spent her first weeks here thinking of it as an accident, a lucky one, but an accident. Lately she had stopped calling it that, not because she had developed a belief in things being predetermined, but because accident implied randomness, and the more she knew about herself, the less random it seemed. She had boarded the wrong boat because she was the kind of person who boarded whatever boat was there when the right boat had already left. She had stayed because she was the kind of person who, given a week's probation, worked as though permanence were already decided. She had come back from the harbor at dawn because she was the kind of person who could hear the distinction Clara was making at 4:45 in the morning and recognize it as true. None of that was accident. It was just who she was, doing what she did, in the specific place where it happened to matter. That was enough. That was, she thought, actually everything. The party moved to the south lawn in the afternoon, the winter sun at the low angle that made even cold light look warm, and Sophie opened Thomas's enormous package to reveal an elaborate wooden dinosaur habitat that Thomas had apparently commissioned from a carpenter on the mainland, with individual carved compartments for each dinosaur and their names burned into the wood in small letters. Sophie received this with the speechlessness of someone encountering a thing that exceeds their capacity to respond, which lasted approximately 10 seconds, and then she sat on the lawn and began arranging her collection with the deliberate care of someone settling something important. Lily was sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the lawn with her coffee, properly made, 2:15 on the pour. Ethan had arrived at this with consistency in the past 3 weeks, when he came to sit beside her. They watched Sophie work. Captain lay beside her with his chin on his paws, having apparently decided that since the plastic triceratopses were not going to be interactive, he would provide moral support instead. "She's going to rearrange that habitat every day," Ethan said. "Obviously," Lily said. "Thomas knows. That's the point. Something you can keep rearranging." He looked at his daughter. "She told him she likes things that can be different tomorrow." Lily looked at the habitat, at Gerald in his new carved compartment, at Margaret beside him, at the 2 stegosauruses in the slot labeled with their names in small burned letters. "That's a 4-year-old's philosophy," she said, "but also, it's not wrong." "No," he said, "it's not." The sun was going down behind the cypress trees, the lanterns not lit today, but visible in the trees where Marcus had left them after the autumn event, already in position for the next time they were needed. The water was doing its late afternoon thing, the color that Lily had stopped trying to find a word for because no single word was adequate, and a list of words was too much. It was just the water, in the light, on the island, and she had seen it enough times now to know it by its variations the way you know a person. Not by a description, but by accumulated presence. Ethan set his coffee cup down on the wall beside him and looked at it for a moment. "I've been thinking about the boat," he said. She looked at him. Which boat? The morning you boarded. What I should have said. He turned his cup in his hands. I've rehearsed it a lot of different ways. Versions where I told you at the dock, versions where I told you after the interview. He paused. I don't think any of the versions I've rehearsed would have been better than what actually happened. Don't do that, she said. What? Decide the outcome justifies the route. It doesn't. She looked at him. What happened was wrong. I'm not revising that, but I'm also... She stopped, found it. I'm also aware that I might not have been myself on the island if I'd known what the island was from the first day. I might have been a version of myself that was managing something, performing. She looked at the water. I don't know that for certain, but I think about it. He was quiet. I think about it too, he said, from the other side. What do you mean? I think about whether you would have told me about the ink on your hand, about the instant noodles, about what you actually thought of the owner of the island. He looked at her sideways. Your exact words, by the way, were someone who's never had to worry about anything in his entire life, which I thought about for approximately a week. She winced. That was unkind. It was honest. Still. It was also not entirely wrong, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not self-pity and not performance, but the simple willingness to be accurate about himself. There was a version of me before Sophie, before Anna died, that fit that description pretty well. Everything arranged, nothing requiring actual contact with difficulty. He paused. I don't want to be that person anymore. I'm not sure I could be now, even if I wanted to. She looked at him, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting at water and also from years of being a person, at the 3 days of stubble that had been a permanent feature of his face for the entire time she'd known him, which she had come to think of simply as his face, at the way he held his coffee cup with both hands, which was something she had noticed on the first morning and had, she realized now, been noticing every morning since. I know who you are, she said. Not grandly, just stating it. Not the biography, not the net worth. Who you are is the man who gets up before dawn to be on the water before anyone else needs anything from him, who hand sands a hull because it's work that asks your hands to be specific, who made pancakes twice in 2 weeks because he felt guilty and wanted to do something with it. She paused. Who asked a building management company to flag any room that dropped below 65 degrees? He looked at the wall. That's the man I know, she said. That's who I'm sitting next to right now. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of something, but the presence of something that doesn't need words immediately. For what it's worth, he said finally, the woman I know is the one who got on the wrong boat and managed an entire dinner out of what was in the garden and the cold room. Who taught a 4-year-old's father to make coffee? Who told a 4-year-old that Gerald is braver than he looks? He looked at her directly. Who came back from the harbor? She held his gaze. I came back for the coffee, she said. Let's be clear. 2:15 on the pour, he said. Every time, she said. Across the lawn, Sophie looked up from her dinosaur habitat, found both of them on the wall with the accuracy of a child who always knows where the people she belongs to are, and went back to her work with the satisfied expression of someone who has verified an important fact. Captain lifted his head, assessed the situation, and put it back down. The sun went a little lower. The water held its color. The lanterns in the cypress trees waited for their next occasion, patient and ready in the way of things that know their purpose and are not in a hurry about it. This was the life, not the arranged version, not the version where everything ran smoothly and no one kept secrets and no one arrived late and no one packed a bag in the middle of the night by lamplight with a plastic dinosaur wrapped in a t-shirt. The actual version, with its wrong boats and its recovered mornings and its coffee that was now, finally, genuinely good. It was enough. It was, as it turned out, exactly enough.